Okay. So
here we are again.
Here we are again. We're now streaming on Facebook onto the Silver Tent group. Welcome everyone again. It's lovely to see you all for our second episode of Sex and the Older Woman. And this time we're going to be focusing on self-pleasure. So let's open up the discussion with self-pleasure and just general terms. What is self-pleasure for you? How do you do it? How often? What does it feel like? Who would like to start?
And maybe whoever starts and whoever goes next, introduce yourself.
Because yes, good point. Because
the previous one.
Yeah. Who would like to go first?
Who's going first? I'll go first.
Go for it, Sunday. You look like you want to go.
Right, I'm Sunday. I'm in England. I live in Ilkley. Been a member of the Silver Tent for a while and enjoying these Silver Tent conversations, and especially enjoying this Sex and the Older Woman one. So yes, what was the question? It was about
self-pleasure.
Yeah, so I've been out on a bike ride today, which is one of my self-pleasure things. And I started to think about along the lines of self-pleasure and how in its broadest sense, I've had to give myself permission to feel all of that, whether it be in my day-to-day living, whether it be in the bed, in having sex, or whether it's the other things around that, the food, the alcohol, the shopping, the buying things. It opened up into a really big thought process as I was cycling along, and I got to thinking about work and how work isn't seen as something that is pleasurable. And my experience of being happy at work was met with confusion, I think, for some people. You know, there's that saying, isn't there? People miss the opportunity of work because it is dressed in overalls or something. There's some sort of saying around it. And actually, I used to get a lot of pleasure out of working, primarily because I think I just like being with people. So that at that base level, you know, that for me is self-pleasure is like hanging out with people, having fun, being playful, being engaged. And then the other aspects of self-pleasuring are the things that I actually choose to do for my body, my mind, my soul, my spirit, things that I know nurture and nourish me, make me feel expanded, make me feel present. So I know that's all sort of a bit theoretical, but it felt important for me to sort of bring that broad brush into this, because it is more than just about, because as somebody starts to say self-pleasure, I think a lot of people's focus goes straight onto orgasms and sex, and I was thinking, okay, so sexual pleasure and sensual pleasure, where's that sort of, is sensual pleasure something that prepares me for sexual pleasure? You know, like, how do I put myself into the position to be ready for an orgasm, if that's the ultimate goal in my self-pleasuring, which it isn't. And I was also thinking about the role of food, the role of alcohol, like buying things, how my self-pleasure, how I feast my eyes on pictures, because before on works of art, I would probably a little bit blind to the pleasure that I get now from looking at beautiful pieces of artwork and noticing more about people's creativity in that realm. And of course, music, you know, when I get the goosebumps on my body, you know, that's like the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, you know, that for me is pleasure. And taking responsibility, obviously, for the self-pleasure that I feel. And I did start to then think more and dig a bit deeper into sensual self-pleasuring and sexual self-pleasuring, which I know we're going to move on to, but yeah, that's sort of my sort of take in this moment around self-pleasure.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sunday. I think we will come back to some of those topics, but let's have some others join in as well. What about Diane or Gwen?
Yeah, yeah. When we had our sort of initial thinking about this and discussions, one of the things that comes to mind for me is candle wax. I love playing with melting candle wax, and I do this. There used to be a restaurant I used to go to up in Aberdeen, and with a group of people, and it was hilarious because I would sit and play, and I wasn't even conscious half the time what I was doing, and other people would be kind of looking at me, and but kind of dropping it and playing around with it, sort of fiddling with it in my hands and moving it around, and that real sensuality to it. It's really beautiful. Yeah, and it kind of, it's cool, and it's not like you say, Sunday, it's not like it's necessarily leading anywhere else like an orgasm, because that's like just one thing, but actually that pleasure. But another thing that gives me enormous pleasure is sound. I was going to say music, but actually yes, music, but music's only one part of sound. And that whole, I have various instruments like a gong, and I have drums, and I have flutes, and but also my voice. I love singing, and I get an incredible sensation throughout my body from singing or from humming. Humming is incredibly good for you. I don't know if any of you do humming, or chanting om and things, but you can just get this amazing vibration and sensation and stuff through your body, and that's remarkably healing. So yeah, those are just the thoughts that are rising to start off with. Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Gwen, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gwen. I'm just going to say my voice is going a little bit. I kind of wanted, I think the reason that could be going was I was away at a festival at the weekend. So I was away for 5 days, and I probably never stopped talking, and I probably talked more than I ever do in my life, really. But one of the things I did, just the whole aspect of being in nature all the time, going to sleep in nature, waking up in nature, walking barefoot, being around other women and connecting was so pleasurable. And I felt it in my body. I felt alive. I felt connected. And one of the things I did when I was away was I did a paint workshop. And this was the most liberating, playful, fun, expressive thing I think possibly I've done, certainly as an older woman. And I would have done this as a younger woman. But as I've got older, I've kind of become a bit more contracted in giving myself pleasure, particularly physical pleasure. I've shut down a little bit, certainly since my divorce 6 years ago. And so what this workshop was about was sitting in a circle as women, talking about how we felt about our bodies. Now, this was women of all ages. And for me, it was very much about being in this older body and how I wasn't as accepting of it as I used to be. I wasn't enjoying it as much as I used to enjoy my body. And then the next stage of the group was for us to remove our clothes and stand in circle and have the permission to look at each and every woman standing there. And there were about 13 women in the group. And that was so pleasurable, to have permission to look at each other, to look at all the different bodies that are there, because, we turn away. It's so frowned upon. You go to the swimming bath, somebody gets undressed and you look away, and yet that's exactly what you want to do. You want to look at the different breasts and and lady gardens and bellies and bums and all of that. And then the next thing was we went into this space and we all had 2 containers of paint and we just squirted each other. And we squealed and we laughed. We were covered in paint, absolutely covered. And it was so freeing. Then we all ran down the field and through the whole festival, and there were men there, but it was just, I just couldn't believe the transformation from wanting to hide my older body to being so freely able to enjoy it and express it. Honestly, I think everybody should have a go at this, but it just, I mean, I haven't quite put photographs on Facebook, I've sent them to friends, but there was no shame, there was no embarrassment, it was pure joy and pleasure, and that was self-pleasure. I also did another workshop, and I realized we had to connect with our yonis, with our wombs, with those sensual, very sensitive places, sexual places in our bodies. And I really did truly realize how much I had closed down in the last 6 years. And it was great having this conversation to come to, because I thought this is exactly what I need. I need to have a self-pleasure practice to bring life back into my entire body, to activate the chi that comes from self-pleasure, the life force, bring that joy back, healing and joy back into my body. Yeah.
Sounds beautiful and incredibly powerful, and I love that kind of work, Gwen, with the paints and stuff like that. I want to explore that more.
Yeah. What about you, Melanie?
So yeah, just a reminder of me. So my name's Melanie Knight. I teach and do body work with women in sexuality. So I love all this sort of stuff. I think it's incredible. I think this touches on something that Sunday was saying as well, that somehow well, certainly for me, I've felt a lot of my life, I've had to be sensible and go to work and, you know, work. I do find work quite enjoyable, but there's certainly not the level of pleasure and freedom that I get from this kind of stuff. So for me, yeah, I love pleasure. I love the you know, the walks in nature and stuff like that. I think is incredible when you actually really connect. And I think Sunday, one of the questions I had for you, which I'll come back to in a moment, was what makes the difference between just a walk in the countryside and one that's incredibly pleasurable. And I think, you know, some of the things we're touching on here is very mindful and using the word spiritual that might not work for everyone, but just really a different way of looking and connecting to pleasure, and being very mindful about it, not just, you know, not just walking in the park just because, you know, we're walking the dog and we're on our phones and stuff like that, but actually, you know, just making every moment of pleasure count. Like really noticing, you know, for me, it's about noticing the leaves and the breeze and the beautiful flowers and the, you know, the insects and the ladybirds and whatever else is there, and really taking it in, using my senses and my touch and just really exploring that is what makes it pleasurable for me. Otherwise, I'm just like off on my phone or something. And I'm gonna turn the attention a bit to more sexual and sensual pleasure, more on a sexual level. For me, my practice has changed since doing a lot of this work. I think I might have shared last time, I was very into BDSM and pain and stuff like that. And I've moved away from that a lot. My tastes have changed over doing a lot of tantric work, in slowing down and noticing touch and the feeling of you know, being more sensual and slower, and taking every moment again with what is it feeling like in my body? What am I noticing? Where is am I feeling the pleasure? Am I feeling, is it arousing? Even if it's not going to an orgasm, it's just actually really noticing where that pleasure is. And again, I think we can be quite switched off, especially when we're going straight to an orgasm. It's like, okay, I've got to get to the orgasm, versus actually there's pleasure in the journey, not in the outcome. And well, not in the outcome, but there's pleasure in the journey. And you know, if we choose to have an orgasm, that's completely pleasurable too. But it's for me, it's about the journey now. I spend a lot of time on massaging my own body with oils. I find oils very sensual. And that again is something I never used to play with before. And sometimes toys, but my reliance on toys is, you know, has dissipated a bit. And but I'd love to hear more from what everyone else thinks about those sorts of more sexual and sensual self-pleasure. Who would like to go next? We've all gone quiet suddenly.
Yeah.
Just thinking about
this
stuff,
is about
you know?
pleasure.
Letting it percolate.
Yeah, letting it. I did say a lot there. So
Yeah.
letting it percolate.
I think the thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, one of the things about aging is that I know my body better. I know what it likes. I know what makes it feel good. And again, I feel very blessed that my childhood and my young adulthood, I've not had a lot of adverse events in my life that have closed me down, because I know that is obviously often the case. Maybe this is another topic. I mean, I did have, I was sexually violated at the age of 8, 9, and that did put me off kissing, because that was the violation. But I won't go into that, but that maybe is a topic that we talk about, how those adverse events affected sexuality and our sexual connection with ourselves. Anyway, I digress. So for me, like, I know that the thing that I love is having my inner forearm stretched, you know, this from here to here. And I don't know how I discovered that. And one day I did, and I thought, and this is a sensual part of me, and how I connect with my body in ways that like you putting oil on and I've just recently, doing these calls are great because it realizes where I've dropped my practice, dropped my connection to this part of my being and how I am in the world. And but I am aware that I touch myself a lot on a regular basis. You know, unconsciously I will stroke myself. You know, there'll be a part of me that I'll get fascinated in, like backs of my hands or something. But in terms of sexual pleasure, it's waxed and it's waned over the years. And now I'm older, it definitely tends to be last thing at night, hit the vibrator, get there, go to sleep.
Your honesty. Thank you so much.
There's nothing wrong with that. I do that.
I've got an old pink rabbit that's probably on its last legs, a little bit noisy unless I press it in a certain place. And the ears are wonderful.
You know, I never knew what that was until today. I never knew what the rabbit was, and It's a type of, for those other women out there, it's a type of vibrator, and I'm sure Sandy can describe it, but that is twice now. Never haven't heard the word in my life before.
I was sharing with Gwen about this different type of vibrator. Do you remember, Gwen?
How could I forget?
I've actually ordered one. It hasn't come through yet, but it's this sucking. Have you heard of it, Sandy?
Yes, I've got one.
You've got one. How is it? Because I've been trying to try
I prefer my rabbit.
You prefer your rabbit? I've heard so many good things about this. I've got to try it.
It's shaped like a little rosebud.
The viewers, to be clear, this is a vibrator you put over your clitoris, and it sucks it like a hoover.
Yes.
Not quite like a hoover.
Not quite, well, it's like pulses and stuff. So.
Oh, don't try the hoover at home.
Well, actually, that might be a good subject for what things have we tried, actually.
Yeah. The jet wash is really good. I had to go with the jet wash one.
Anyway. Water pressure is really, I sometimes do the hose.
Oh, dear me. Anyway.
I have one of those spa baths, you know, that had the water jets. But one thing I think is important to just mention, particularly as we as older women, it's really useful to have a good lubricant. And I definitely, there's quite a lot of very good natural ones out there. And in fact, I would use coconut oil.
Yeah, I was going to add that actually. I tend to use oils. So fractionated coconut oil or almond oil are really good. And castor oil can be very good as a healing if you're doing massage from a healing point of view as well. But yeah, I tend to use natural oils now.
Yeah, it's quite important just to say that if we are using toys and vibrators, it's particularly us as older women, it's advisable to use something.
Yeah, and I think while we're on the subject of that, I think it's also worth saying about vibrators as well. And it might not be everyone's experience, but one thing I loved in the write-up of the sucking one that I've just bought is that it's known for not numbing sensation, and overuse of vibrators. I think, I don't have any evidence for this, but I suspect, especially as an older woman, because the lining of that area thins a lot, so I suspect it could be quite easy to feel sore or pain in that area, and it might be the use of the vibrator, not just needing lubricant. So for anyone out here who does experience that, it might be worth experimenting. Yeah. Anyway, where did we get to? I don't know. I'm lost now.
I think you were asking. Yeah, you were asking what we did, sort of specifically more sexually.
Diane, do you want to add?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny, Sandy, you saying about the inside bit of the arm. Yeah, I discovered that one years ago, and it is. I quite like stroking myself there. I do find that very pleasurable, really, and quite a nice calming thing as well. So yeah, something that I can't do for myself, but an area that I know is a real erogenous zone for me is the back of my neck. Just down there, and it's just like, yeah, any guy who touches me there, I tell you, I have to be really careful. So luckily a lot of guys don't seem to be aware of it, which is great.
Well, they might be now.
This is going on YouTube, so.
That's true. Well, it's all right, they can learn something, give more women
definitely
pleasure.
I love that area too, and I think it's nice to talk about erogenous zones, because there are a lot more. We tend to focus on our genitals, but there are a lot of erogenous zones that we don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the back of the neck is much more a turn on than other areas that are more obvious. So yeah, I was trying to think other things as well. So yeah, but you mentioned lubricants, and so I'll just put in here, I use olive oil, but not cooking olive oil. I'm not suggesting what you got in the kitchen. You can buy stuff from the chemist, which is just, you know, small bottles of olive oil that have been pharmaceutically treated. So yeah, so I use that. But it's interesting, that one, actually, because I found when I was younger, you know, you can get dry at any time, but you can also be very juicy at any time as well. And it just might take a little while to kind of get things flowing. But I don't know what your experience is, but for me, once it's flowing, it's flowing. You know, it's not a problem. So I'm very lucky there, I guess. But yeah, interesting. And in terms of personal practice, because that's the words you said, wasn't it, Melanie? Kind of, do you have a person? I just do everything in the moment, but that's the way I lead my life. You know, it tends to be very much in the moment. But I do know that springtime, I definitely get the sap rising in March. I definitely, you know, feel that energy. And yeah, you know, I tend to be more active in March than I can possibly other times of the year. Might be quieter. So yeah, but yeah, there you go.
I've not tracked the months. That's an interesting way to do it, actually.
I know. Well, it was just something I noticed, and I would definitely be kind of seeking out things. That this was all after I split up with my son's father, and I kind of, part of my journey with that was actually rediscovering myself. And it's interesting, Gwen, you say you feel you've closed down since your divorce. Actually, I just found it incredibly liberating, because I realized I'd closed down during my marriage, which is sad, you know, sad for us both, really. You know, so that was really interesting, just rediscovering that part of me. And yeah, I had a lot of fun, shall we say, after that. But anyway, yes.
Beautiful. You just made me, it's maybe slightly off the topic, but I think it's worth bringing up. You talking about juiciness and stuff. My experience from talking to women of our age, that actually the opposite can be true, is like you know, and I know we've touched on using lubricants and stuff like that, but vaginal dryness, obviously, as we go into menopause, can be quite a challenge for a lot of people, and soreness. I was sharing the other day that I had what I thought was persistent UTIs for, you know, a year or two. Not realizing till I happened to go to the gynecologist for something else, but that she told me that it wasn't UTI after all. It was a vaginal wall thinning, and gave me some estrogen cream. I've now swapped on to a natural version of estrogen and pestrogen. Is that the words? Cream, and I think, you know, that's made a huge difference. It feels like my yoni's gone back to what it used to be in terms of, you know, juiciness and stuff like that. So I think also it's worth bringing up, because a lot of people, I was talking to someone just last week actually on a course I was on, how she feels that area is so dead that she doesn't feel that she'd ever be able to, you know, potentially have penetrative sex again. And I think, you know, I just think it's worth reassuring women that there are things out there that can be done in this area, and it's not over.
You know, I think these are such important conversations.
They are.
And they are, aren't they? And not just for us as older women, but for younger women too. There is just appalling sex education around. You know, it's very, very biological, functional, and we need to talk about pleasure and how the body changes, and what happens if we're going through a very stressful situation. So there's a lot of just lack of information and knowledge and conversation. And that's why these are really so important. So, because I think, you know, it's sort of like expected men will masturbate from an early age. You know, boys will wank day and night, but not girls, you know.
That's a fallacy, to use a pun.
No, I know. That's the societal message out there. Good girls don't do that. You know, it's shameful. Boys can do it as much as they want, but there's an awful lot of kind of conditioning and programming around girls. And you're absolutely right. That is not the truth of it. But what happens is it makes it, what it does is it instills shame and fear. And therefore, you know, we still have that now as older women. You know, how can we dispel some of these myths? How can we help each other? How can we help our younger women as well?
And I think a question to put, sorry, Sandy, I'll come back to you in a sec.
Is it the question?
Well, I want to put it to the audience, actually. I think it's a really nice thing to, you know, for anyone watching this, whether now or later, to, you know, to bring your questions. You know, this is the only way we can dispel these myths is actually with people, you know, sharing what their myths are and you know, and or even what feels true for people, because very often what we feel is true is very often, you know, so deeply rooted, but it's not necessarily the truth. So just to put a call out there for everyone to participate and share and put your questions out there. Sunday?
Yeah, we were coming on here to talk about self-pleasure.
Yeah, we were.
I could feel myself going, oh, what am I going to say? Or what's, you know, I was reticent and I could feel my inhibitions, but also my fear of getting it wrong. You know, that some aspect of my body that I didn't know and understand, you know, information about, for example, I watched a program today on I'm not going to say what channel it's on, but it's called The Principles of Pleasure. And what I'd never known was the clitoris, this tiny little mound on the outside, is this huge piece of the body inside. I'd never realized this. I'm 66 and I never knew this. I never knew that the G-spot is stimulated by the inside of the clitoris. I never knew this. And if I don't know this, and I trained as a tantric priestess, how much out there do we not know? Are we not?
Part of my work with women is to do something what we call mapping, which is to look at the different parts of the clitoris, this whole, well, not the whole vaginal area, or the yoni, some people call it, is to really map out the different parts, the inner lips, the outer lips, you know, the different areas, because they're all sensitive in their own way, and they all contain pleasure if we, you know, stroke them and stimulate them in various different areas. But yes, you're right. We're not taught this. I didn't know it until I went to tantric workshops. And it's such a shame when we don't have that mind-body connection. So mapping is about touching and exploring an area and creating that mapping in our mind to actually, what is this sensation I'm feeling in my body and where is that on my body? So that's a really beautiful mindful practice, and then that starts to encourage women to be able to experience more pleasure, because we're so focused very often on just the clitoris. Sandy, you were about to say something earlier.
Well, I thought you were going to ask the question, which was...
Which question?
The first orgasm thing.
Oh, I hadn't forgotten, but I wasn't sure which question you were talking about. Well, let's go to that one. What do you want to say about that one, Sunday?
Well, yeah, and for me, I had no I didn't know an awful lot. Strange as that may be, living on a farm, you'd think that I perhaps would know quite a bit, but I was sort of really naive, which I suspect we all are. And so when I had the when I first had this sensation that came over me, that I then realized was an orgasm, was when I was on a horse. And I was riding the horse, and I've been thinking about this today. So that what I think what brought it on was this, and there's a bit of shame around this, so bear with me. I felt like I was in control and dominating this animal underneath me, because long story short, I was forced to do quite a lot work-wise, farm-wise, and controlled and dominated. And I was the youngest, so I had nobody else I got a lot of that dumped down on me, but I was the end of the line. So where did I dump the side, passing the pain parcel on? So to have this sort of feeling of trying to get this animal, this pony, Sylvester, as it was, or was it Cavelli? I don't know. Anyway, it was one of those two. And I was squeezing my legs really hard and forcing him to do something perhaps that he didn't want to do, and I did. And then I had these sensations come over me, and I hadn't a clue. I thought I'd wet myself, actually, to be honest. And so I trotted off to my mum, bless her, and said, Mum, I've had this really strange sensation, like I was weeing myself. And what was it? And she didn't say anything, because she'd not talked to me about this sort of thing at all. Obviously, I'd started my periods. I'm remembering that this is going on YouTube at this point. Oh, wow, And so the upshot, the funny bit about this was, one night I just shouted as I was going out the door, said, Mum, I'm just going out. And she said, where are you going? I said, just going for a ride. But Sunday, it's dark. I said, I won't be long. Of course she knew. But there were those moments of, when you go into what I would call oblivion, where the whole world could implode and you wouldn't be aware. Well, those moments, I was totally out of control of this cantering horse that was underneath me. And I'm pleased to say that I became less dominating than I had been that time when it first initiated. But interesting that it scared me when I think about that. It sort of scared me that dominating, controlling aspect of myself, which is in me. And it hasn't materialized into anything that I would consider kinky sex. I haven't had that experience of BDSM and all that, and not, and just haven't had that, and there's part of me that is slightly scared of that side of sexual pleasure from pain. Wouldn't be my choice, and I know it is for some. So thank you for listening to that little story, and I'm grateful to my mum, who she didn't say an awful lot, and yet she just, I guess she knew and didn't make it wrong, really. Yeah,
that's lovely, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that.
Thank you.
It's really lovely.
Got a lot of exercise, did it?
I spread it around. I had a few at the time. They could almost all got it again.
Oh, brilliant. Any other first orgasms that want to be shared? Or
well, it's not my first, because I have no idea when my first one was. I honestly don't know, but I do remember I definitely was self-pleasuring in kind of fairly obvious ways by the time I was into my early teens. But when I was 17, I remember being on a bus and my legs were crossed, and I was on the top of the bus, which is always a bit more wobbly than the lower deck on a bus. And it was hilarious, because I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, I'm going in. I knew what I was going into, and I thought, this is in public. What am I doing? What's going on? And it was hysterical. And the trouble is, I've no idea whether I was making any noise. I was very conscious by then, the fact that you can make a lot of noise at times. And I thought, I hope I'm not making any noise here. You know, there was all this stuff going on in my head while there were other things happening in other parts of my body. And it was just so funny. It was so funny. Yeah, a funny memory, but yeah.
Oh, this would just make the best ever sort of performance, wouldn't it? Ensemble performance about your first orgasm. God knows, I have no idea why I did this, but I discovered orgasm at quite an early age. I used to use a pencil. But I mean, I never, and then I later on with my first ever boyfriend had orgasms, but it was never penetrative orgasms. So why I ever used this pencil, I do not know, to insert into my vagina, but I hid them. You know, there would have been no noise, because unlike you, Sunday, if my mother had known, her response would have been very different. It would have been disgusting, you know, and keep your hands above the duvet sort of thing. So I'm interested, looking back now, thinking I lived in a household where that was never talked about, sex was never talked about. The word masturbation, I don't think had ever been used in front of me. I knew how to do it, but I knew I had to hide it as well. And that's experience. I know that's experience of a lot of, and still is, you know, which is why I suppose I go back to this thing about talking about it and talking about the different sorts of orgasm, because what we see on TV is the man and woman come together and they simultaneously orgasm. He penetrates her and they both have this wild orgasm. How many people have had that experience?
But that creates a lot of pressure when I talk, and men especially as well. It creates a lot of pressure to perform in that way.
Yeah. You know, and I say, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it to the men as well, because they don't get, you know, not all men, but a lot of men don't really know what to do with the woman. The woman can't bring herself to tell the man what gives her pleasure. And so he's guessing. Yeah. And then, you know.
Nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare.
And then we wonder why. I think we're not happy necessarily in relationships. A lot of people aren't. And I think it's such a shame, because you know, we've lost the knowledge of thousands of years ago where men would be taught how to pleasure a woman.
Yes.
You know, that like the elder women would teach younger men how to pleasure a woman.
Yeah. Well, there's a role.
Yeah, there is a role.
I'm sure
I've thought about fulfilling that one. Well, I do to a degree in my position here, but it's you know, it's a wise woman elder role that I think has been lost, and so people learn off porn or, you know, friends or magazines, and it's just so. It's all myths, and
I can't understand, in a way, I can't understand why it's such a secret, taboo thing, you know, and the body and all its functions are all hidden away, and we miss out. I just think we miss out on the educational part of it and the loveliness of it all, really.
That's a whole subject in its own right,
and it just makes it all dive underneath and becomes smutty and sordid and invisible and a mystery, and it doesn't serve us somehow for it all to go under.
But it was hidden.
The patriarchy.
Yeah, it was hidden for thousands of years because men didn't want women to be powerful, and in that role we are powerful sexual beings, and we are. And that was hidden throughout society, throughout history. And so that's a whole subject in its own right, which I'm sure, you know, Gwen and myself could probably talk more about at some point. But yeah, it's such a shame, because then we've gone down a road which I think leaves both men and women very dissatisfied with their sexual experiences.
Is that true of all societies, though? Because I'm just thinking, when I was in Zimbabwe, person that I knew there, she was still a virgin. She was in her late 20s, but she wasn't married. But she said, you know, she'd had, you know, teachings basically on how to pleasure and get pleasure in sex. But it wasn't, you know, she was just waiting. She was waiting for the time when she'd be able to use it, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to talk for other cultures and stuff like that. But my understanding is a lot of other cultures also don't have that sort of experience. But, you know, it's difficult. It would be lovely to hear from people from other cultures what their thoughts are on this.
And maybe that is how we can expand this conversation to some degree, Diane. It's looking at different cultures and their attitudes and their beliefs and what does happen around conversations and practices that are not, you know, some of what I've said today is there are generalizations, but it would be good to know about the differences. And even in our community, as Melanie said earlier, you know, if you listen to this or the recording, it would be great to hear what your experience is, and just to add to the conversation, please, that would be most welcome.
It would. So I'm conscious we've only got about 13 minutes left. A couple of other points we had on our thoughts to talk about was how does pain and disability impact self-pleasure? Does anyone want to have experience of that? Want to share about that? I certainly can, but
when I damaged my back and had nerve damage, and it could be that it was that, and also I was in grief and on citalopram antidepressants at the time, because I know certain medications can actually stop you getting erect. I don't get erections, but you know what I mean. It stops you getting aroused.
Yeah, it can have a numbing effect
on the libido. So when I had the combination of those two things, lower back injury on medication, I couldn't get there. I'd like get to this point and it never broke. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It breaks, doesn't it? The orgasm sort of like goes to here and then it goes whoosh. Well, mine does. I don't know. Big conversation around types of orgasms, but it never broke, and it was horrendous. It really was. It was like trying to sing, but you lost your voice. It was that sort of thing. Or whistle, and your whistle wouldn't come. It was that sort of sensation. So that's my experience of, and I stopped doing that for quite some time, and then it came back, and I was relieved. There was such a relief that, oh, okay, because I thought if that's gone, you know, there was a fear attached to it that I possibly will never have another orgasm. And then it came back, which was a huge relief. That's my bit of injury, I suppose, and its impact.
That's really significant, Sandy. I was just thinking, I hadn't even thought of that, how many people might be on medication and they can't have any sort of sexual stimulation or orgasm. I mean, and what grief there would be in that. What a great sense of loss, especially if you're in a relationship. I mean, that's another thing we don't talk a lot about either. So I think that's really, I'm glad you mentioned that really that is something, and I'm sure there will be members of our community that perhaps are experiencing that.
Definitely. And I think, you know, one of the things that strikes me is that we certainly, as who are UK based, we live in a society which is, you know, GPs hand out pills for anything, pain medication, depression, all that sort of stuff, and not really concerned about side effects and worried about, oh well, you know, you might lose your libido. Well, what you know, what's the matter with that, really? You know, there is this just, you know, just put pills to solve the problem, which I think very often doesn't, and people don't know that there are potentially other ways to do things. I've lived, I think I shared on the last video, but I've lived with chronic pain for about 7 years. And I was determined not to let it affect my sex life and my libido, but I also didn't want to take huge amounts of pain medications. But it's tough living with pain every day. It's draining. You know, just moving off the sofa can be hard work. You start counting the steps you make between the kitchen and the lounge or whatever, because it's just, everything's hard work. So the thought of making love on top of that can be just like, you know, just like, oh, I can't be bothered. But I didn't want to live like that. But pushing past it every day can also be a challenge. And actually what I found through tantric practices was not pushing past it, but learning to relax into it and learning to notice my body and what my body needed. But that also takes time, and it takes a lot of, I suppose, daily practice, you know, self-pleasure practice or whatever, that, you know, to really sit and be with what's in our body and not try and fix it with you know, pain medication. So it can be, but it can be really debilitating. I think we talk quite a bit about disability, but actually chronic pain is a problem. I can't remember the stats now, but it's a huge problem across the world.
And yet the endorphins from having self-pleasure can alleviate the pain.
And actually relaxing into it can relieve pain, because again, we tense up so much with stress, and also orgasm. The kind of orgasm that most of us know about is a tensing up version. Which actually can, you know, can make pain worse. But relaxing into pleasure actually can really be beneficial for pain.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because
it can be hugely difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes to relax into pain. I mean, I've been there as well, and I've tried breathing through it, but I've also taken painkillers as well.
Yeah, and I do too. It's not that I completely come off painkillers. And I know some people who do it completely pain-free. Like I was watching slightly off subject, but a while ago I was watching you know, a whole giving birth thing, and the whole, you know, being able to have orgasms during giving birth. When you really relax into the pain, it's possible to have orgasms.
Wow.
I often wondered at that, 27 and a half hours in labor, and I never had an orgasm.
I mean, that's such a thing to say. You came out on an orgasm.
And I've seen the evidence, I've seen videos, and I've heard of people doing it, and it's, you know, it can be done. It's mindful practice and relaxing into pain. It's not, it is a, you know, our bodies know what it needs to do to enjoy pleasure.
And I wonder how much it is the brain that actually, you know, like if you really twigged into self-pleasuring, it must feed on itself, because obviously our beliefs, our values, our behaviors are based on what we tell ourselves. So if we go around saying, well, whatever we say, you know, I can have multiple orgasms, for instance. I mean, I've never said that to myself because I don't have that as an experience and I don't believe it. But then if I kept training myself, Yeah, you see, if I trained myself, you know, maybe I too could have it on the bus every day.
Yeah. But it is that same thing with the pregnancy that I was just talking about, giving birth. Have it that giving birth is hard and painful. But actually, it doesn't need to be like that. It's our mind that tells us that, because we've been told
us that.
Well, my body obviously seems to know what it needs to do, because in the past couple of years, I've started having orgasms in my sleep quite regularly.
Oh, wow.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So that's my self-pleasure practice. I just go to bed and go to sleep.
Look, Mum, no hands. They're above the quilt, Mum.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to a point, Gwen, that Sunday pointed to there as well, this about being possible. There's something I've been playing with recently, which is, there's a slight block for me, which is my body feels it's able to have an orgasm without me touching it.
Yes. Breath.
And for me, that's a slight block, because I can feel it's possible, but there's something in me that says this shouldn't be happening. like it's not possible, but it completely is.
It completely is. I've come very close to orgasm just through breath work, tantric breath work.
Yeah. Me too. And touch as well. Well, not touch, but
no touch, just breath.
Yeah, I was just thinking, not even touch. I was thinking, breath work, and just, I can't even think I haven't got a good example, but just, the state I'm in.
Can you imagine?
It's orgasmic state.
Can you imagine if we are just walking orgasms, and the energy that's going into the planet and everybody as a result of that? I like to see that, you know, they say about your vibration, you know, and if we're vibrating at that level, it must, like, how healing is that for the planet, people, you know? I just like that thought, that my
I love that thought too.
Leaking out and healing on that level.
Well, I think there's two things there for me. I think there's that I've been playing with the possibility that it is totally possible to be orgasmic 24/7 as a lifestyle.
I'd just like to hear from Diane before we go.
Me too. We haven't heard from you for a while, Diane.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, sort of where my mind's gone is there is also a condition that means that some women constantly have orgasms and they don't want it, you know, and that's, you know, and I can't remember what it's called now. And I really feel for someone who's going through that, because that must be horrendous, you know, feeling so, that must be disempowering in unbelievable ways, you know, which is, and I just, you know, I mean, I think part of my problem is so many people just, you know, it's that classic thing of ignoring a lot of stuff to do with women's stuff. And that's why, you know, people don't, you know, Gwen, you know, you didn't know about the clitoris, you know, because people didn't do research on it, because, well, it's just there, you know, we know what it is, you know, it's not realizing it's, you know, goes 7 or 8 inches up into the body, you know, it's like, wow, you know, that's as long as a man's penis, or longer than a lot of men's penis, you know, and it's, you know, it's like, wow, you know, that's a big deal.
There's two things to add to that. First of all, the women's clitoris isn't in a lot of medical journals, medical books about biology. And second of all, I think what you said is interesting, because the research I've heard recently is in the womb, biologically, men and women have the same parts.
That's correct.
And the penis is just, it becomes the external part, but the women is exactly the same. It's just internal. So we have the same, there's a word for it, but we have the equivalents in each of the female and male versions.
And it's up until 5 weeks, something like that, before it is determined which sex, however the child develops.
Beautiful. Well, I'm conscious it's just got to 5 o'clock. Time's gone so quickly. But I think we should wrap it up there because we have scheduled this for an hour. It's been lovely spending time with you all and hearing your stories, and this is, you know, this is the way it should be. So thank you very much for sharing. And for people watching this, again, feel free to comment on anything. And we're all four of us, well, I'll speak for me and Gwen, but you know, Diana's Sunday as well. I'm sure we'll be looking at the comments and responding as we can as well. So
yeah, thank you. This has been so much fun.
it has. It's such an amazing subject that we need to be sharing with the world. So thank you.
And will we be back again for a round 3 of something?
Well, I'm thinking yes, but let's all talk and plan. But yes, for the audience, I think there'll be more. But yeah, look out for details of that.
Yeah,
I'm going to stop the recordings now. Let's pause for a moment.